make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 8th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin filling in for Shin Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio today is Cheska Dainha.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Happy Friday! And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. Both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Now, as usual, we're going to start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. First, have you ever heard of financial literacy? It's the ability to understand and make use of financial skills such as personal finance management, budgeting, and investing. And survey data released by the Bank of Korea and Financial Supervisory Service on Thursday showed that adults in Korea had the 8th highest financial literacy among 39 participating countries in 2022 with 67 points, 7 points higher than the average. Now, out of the survey's 3 parameters, financial knowledge, behavior, and attitude, Korea scored the highest in knowledge. Moving on, it appears that having a lifelong job is no longer the norm here in Korea. Data from one domestic online career platform showed that 56% of office workers in the country applied for a new job last year, a 5% increase from the year before. The most frequently cited reasons were the lack of career advancement opportunities and employment stability within their current companies. And we end up with a workplace dilemma. An online community post has sparked heated debate among users. It's about a colleague who brings and eats strong-smelling food like tteokbokki, pizza, and chicken in the office. And despite their boss telling them to eat elsewhere or strictly during lunchtime, this behavior goes on. So finding the smell and the sound increasingly bothersome, the writer asks whether he should report this matter to the higher-ups. So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on this situation? Do you think this situation or action is acceptable?
I find it quite funny that they had to ask the online community whether they should go to the higher-ups. I mean, to be honest with you, it seems like a very minor situation.
It's kind of a big situation.
I mean, what would the CEO of that company say? Like, yeah, I mean, you just eat. But honestly, from my personal opinion, I actually have to agree with the office in this situation. Not just negatively, but also in a positive manner of, sometimes when I smell food, I get hungry and it's very distracting.
Right. I knew he was going to say that.
Exactly, yes. I love my food. And if they're one person bringing in like a whole pizza or a whole box of chicken or even like a big thing of tteokbokki, like...
I know what you're going to say, yeah.
Share.
I know.
Share your food.
Share that thing around.
Exactly what I was thinking.
But to be honest with you, I think it's the same as playing loud music in your office, right? You wouldn't do it, so therefore I don't think you should also bring strong-smelling food into the office.
Right, because you're not alone in the office. You're working with your colleagues and other people. Now, how about you, Cheska? What are your thoughts on this?
I just want to preface that I love talking about food with Walter. Like, and I love it too. And I'm waiting like for him to go first and set the tone.
Yes.
I mean, this I completely agree with him. If you're told not to, then I think it's just better not to.
Right,
I mean,
there's a reason.
There is a reason, and there might be people who are on a diet, like people who are very sensitive to food, like Walter, who gets very angry when he can't eat and someone's like chewing a chicken.
Yeah.
And also like someone who's maybe getting ready for a medical examination.
Right.
Fasting, or maybe just on a fast for religious reasons, who knows?
Yeah.
So I mean, have a nice food and go to the cafeteria or like hang out with your friends in a separate corner. I just think it's normal.
Yeah, we should always be considerate about others as well, as we mentioned before, because it's an office, we're working with everybody. So, right, and that was our news feed for this Friday. Now we're going to move on to our main discussion topic of the day. Today, March 8th, is International Women's Day, recognized by the United Nations since 1977. It's a day that celebrates the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women and raises awareness about women's equality and rights. Now, when it comes to gender equality, one thing we need to talk about is the glass ceiling. For more, here's my AI voice secretary.
The glass ceiling. It's a metaphor often used to describe the barriers that prevent women from reaching higher levels of professional success. Every year, The Economist magazine announces the Glass Ceiling Index, which assesses whether women have equal treatment at work. Last year, South Korea ranked the lowest among 29 OECD countries for the 11th straight year. Why is this the case? And what solutions might our generation propose to break through this glass ceiling?
So not only is today International Women's Day, another reason why we chose this topic today is because our generation is and will be part of the active workforce for the next few decades. So let's start about addressing the situation among our generation. So I want to ask you, Cheska, are there any data or stats that really show how our generation is actually feeling the glass ceiling?
Yeah, I think for the topics like this, I think it's good to know if it is really happening to
Right.
people around us. So let's take a look at the screen to find out. So when asked specifically, when women experience the most harsh gender discrimination, almost 60% responded that they do experience it at work. So almost as if they start the career, it seems they encounter some sort of gender discrimination. This could involve hierarchy, inappropriate behavior and comments, and as we will mention afterwards, in terms of opportunities or even, I guess, treatment based on your gender and your conditions. Yeah.
Right, so more than half of the respondents answering that they face gender discrimination kind of, I think, shows that our generation is feeling some sort of a glass ceiling here. Now, anything you'd like to add on this, Walter?
Yeah, it's just something short. So when asked whether Korea is a society in which it is easy for female leaders to be actual leaders, become CEOs, etc., or move up in the ranks of their company, it seems that 95% of the MZ generation answered that it is, and it's such a big problem. So 95%, that means obviously males and females agree as well.
Right.
This figure is more than twice higher than that of people in their 50s. So it does seem like there's still a problem here in South Korea.
Right, and I think that the reason why we are seeing such results in the stats and surveys is because Korea has often been criticized for its thick glass ceiling rooted in its patriarchal culture that comes from Confucianism. However, I think that when compared to our mother and grandmother's generation, we're seeing an increase in women's rights movements and also more women participating in the workforce here in the country. So I want to ask you, do you think there has been progress in terms of gender equality here in the country?
You know, it's such a tricky question because it isn't just about the proportion that we see in the workforce.
Right.
We're not talking just about how many more women do we have in the workforce, but it's also about representation and treatment as well.
Definitely.
So to put that in a simple term, we're not talking about lifting the same amount of weight as male. We're not talking about that equality.
Right.
So in corporate setting, I've heard from many of my senior leaders that are in the business that it is incredibly difficult to get promoted if you get married or if you have kids, because in order to receive benefits, you have to, be able to do certain things. So one of them actually told me very specifically off the record that her boss told her that she would not be able to have a board position if she had a child.
Really?
And these things, I guess, somewhat frequently happen. So how they're spoken to, not just in terms of the benefits they can receive or the kind of lifestyle they can have. Also, they have a different standards for professionalism as well, how you dress or how you style yourself. So I would say it's, quote, still in the works, yeah.
Right, still a long way to go. Now, how about you, Walter? What do you think?
Actually, that sort of reminded me of the situation that my wife had. We just recently had a child a year ago, and my wife is in her late 30s, where she has to also think about, whether she wants to move up in her career or have a child. So we chose to have a child, but she is worried when she goes back, the sort of criticism she might get, whether she's able to do the work because she has a child. Hopefully, I'll be there to help her out a lot more, so she is able to progress through her work. But, it's a really hard topic for me to talk about as the only male in the studio at the moment. And honestly, as you both know, I treat you both with the same respect as I would with anyone else. I do believe that equality has increased somewhat, not a very dramatic change. I still think there's a lot of changes that need to be made, especially when the older generation are still in charge. But what I can notice is that the MZ generation, we are ones to speak out, whether the older generation back in their day, they were more of just yes people. To the higher ups, they would always say yes regardless of what, or they would always accept whatever was given to them from the higher ups.
Right. I think that our generation starting to voicing out for change is definitely important. Now, to extend the conversation more personally, Cheska, have you, as a working woman yourself, have you ever encountered the glass ceiling?
I had one instance when I realized I was paid differently from my male colleague, even though I had more qualifications for the job. So I actually demanded it for higher raise, and the CEO at the time, he was very open and he granted it to me right away. But I do remember the HR sort of pulling me aside and asking me why he thought I deserved a raise.
Really?
Yeah, and I compared it with my male colleagues, but I wasn't sure if he was convinced. But this is just one example. But a lot of my work involves international projects, as Walter, and I was aware that I was a young young Asian talent. So I think consciously and subconsciously, I train my mind to represent myself, both as a female, but also not to be ethnicity discriminated. So it was quite sad because I could see it happen too much in my industry, especially in the media and entertainment. I mean, a lot of Hollywood stars, both male and female, speaking up and giving testimonials about the huge salary and wage gap that's happening in the industry. So I really think there should be improvements.
Right, but like making the voice heard and representing like you did and all those Hollywood stars, I think, as we mentioned before, that's really important. It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
And going back to you, Walter, have you ever witnessed your female family members or friends around you experience this kind of discrimination?
So I've obviously heard a lot of stories outside with my wife or friends as well, in regards to certain maybe over-the-top gestures by men or like inappropriate language, etc., like that. But I've been pretty lucky that I personally haven't worked at a place where there was a lot of unequal treatment towards women. I've always actually been working in fields that have been dominated by women. So example, the English broadcasting industry is very heavily dominated by women. Teaching as well, that was very heavily dominated by women. Hospitality is another one as well.
Right.
And maybe I have just been blind to it because I haven't really looked into it so much. As I said, I treat everyone with the same respect. I don't really get into the deep, how much are you getting paid compared to me sort of situation, because I find that very rude in the first place. But, I've worked for many women and I felt that women I worked with were well respected. But saying that, again, I was just a person at the bottom. I never saw what the top did to the bottom or the middle or the women. So it's hard for me to say on this subject, to be honest with you.
Right. So now going back to the glass ceiling index, back to you, Walter. Can you tell us more about what this glass ceiling index is and how Korea has been performing on this front?
Okay, so not well. So the
That's a good way to start.
Yeah, if we're going to be honest, not well. The glass ceiling index has been actually at its lowest point for 11 years. As we said in the AI voice, it's been 11 years running since 2013. Now, just in case you don't know, the glass ceiling index is calculated by combining detailed indicators such as education gap between men and women. This also includes income gap, labor participation rate, the ratio of women in high-ranking positions, childcare costs, and the status of paternity leave. Now, in Korea, the income gap between men and women is quite large, and the proportion of women in high-ranking positions is lower than other OECD countries. Now, there could be certain reasons behind that, one of which is down to child rearing, maternity leave, as well as parental leave for fathers. We just talked about it, I won't repeat it, but just quickly, a lot of women have to choose between a career and also their child. So that could be reasons why there are still not a lot of women in the higher ranks.
Those could be some of the factors. And Cheska, what do you think are some other reasons why Korea is lagging behind all the other OECD countries?
Yeah, as Walter mentioned, why are we 11 years in the running for not such a great stuff?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that a lot of experts point out is it's very plain, lack of regulations and laws and benefits. Walter and I just had a personal commentary. I think it's very important for both women and men to give in a parental leave, because when you have a child, it's a mutual job. So if you can't have the benefits or the protection from society, how could you focus on your career or your child rearing, right? So in a lot of European countries, they've already legislated having a parental leave for both the men and women. So I think these are one of the things that they can definitely benefit society. And one of the things that I think is important when it comes to representation is I saw a really, really touching article just a couple of weeks ago about the Minnesota City Council having its all-women representation for the first time in the US history, all 7 members. And even on top of that, they were of color. So there was actually a Korean woman that was on the Minnesota City Council as well.
Amazing.
And one of the things that I personally realized, even as a woman, was how uncanny and weird it was to see all women up on the stand making a speech, because we have never seen it before. So that's when I realized why representation and equality is important, because we have to get used to seeing women and of course men on taking a leadership role just equally.
Right, definitely right. So now so far we talked about the situation, the glass ceiling in Korea, but expanding our discussion, we also asked our viewers about their experiences with the glass ceiling. And here's what 3 of them had to say. So when we look at the comments, Leon says, Singapore has made strides towards gender equality in the workplace, but there's still evidence of a glass ceiling for women seeking leadership positions. Women hold a significantly lower percentage of board seats and senior management positions compared to men. Benny says the Philippines is slowly welcoming an era with female leaders in the government or in a normal workplace too. Tasmia says thanks to Bangladesh's prime minister, our glass ceiling has been decreasing little by little. So these are the situations and glass ceilings by some countries that were mentioned from our viewers. There's still some way to go, but we're still seeing meaningful changes. So we're now going to bring an expert into our discussion and talk about some ways to break the glass ceiling. We'll be right back, so stay tuned. So today we're joined by An Jun-sung, an attorney at law. Welcome, Mr. An, to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning. So first of all, what is the current status of gender inequality in workplaces or the so-called glass ceiling in Korea? Are there any available stats or data to quantify this?
Well, yes. According to a recent survey conducted by the British weekly magazine, The Economist, that Korea was ranked the 29th out of 29 OECD members. There's actually even more embarrassing fact that Korea has been ranked 29th for the past 12 years since that Economist conducted the survey 2013. So in calculating the index, the Economist used 10 factors and analyzed that the gender pay gap was a key controlling factor to the current Korean status. And I have 2 personal observations. I mean, the gender pay gap actually interesting. I looked up the data actually. Last year's gender pay gap in Korea was reported to about 31%, which is about 3 times higher than that of OECD average, which was about 12%. So it's really the gender pay gap is a big issue in Korea and inequality. And then I think that in terms of gender pay gap is that I think it really depends on the sector and where you're working. Actually, when I work at the law firm, we have a bill of hours. So we don't really care is the male or female lawyers, as long as you got the satisfying number of the bill of hours, you got paid. Basically, we calculated how many hours you do it. But some industry is very hard to calculate the time how you spend, how it work. I think that depends on sector specific issues also. And there's, I think, also the cultural factor that that Korea was the bottom country for the gender inequality issue. But if you're looking at bottom number 2 is the Japan. There are only 2 Asian countries in OECD out of 29, right? So I think there's a cultural factor in there also. And then also the other thing I found very interesting, the data conducted by the U.S. survey firm, and even U.S. that one of the headline for the report was that the past 20 years, the gender inequality has not been significantly improved in the United States. So using that data, I think that the gender inequality issue is not easy to change in a short period of time. It's time consuming issue also. You have to be consistent and patient to improve that issue.
Would you like to ask the last question?
Okay, so unfortunately we're running out of time. So Mr. An, can you suggest, last but not least, legal measures that can be implemented to address this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I checked the OECD recommendation made by OECD. One of the things they talk about the pay transparency issues means that if you think that there's a pay difference based on gender, you can ask your employee to disclose what kind of how difference your female or colleague pay or male, what's the difference. So I think it's a good idea to think about implementing the kind of policy so that if there are issues, you can, and especially I think in the private sector, they might be more interested. In the public sector, I think the situation much better actually.
All right, thank you, Mr. An, for your valuable insights today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Right. So before we wrap up, I would like to ask you guys, are there any advice that you guys would like to give on fostering a working environment where everyone is treated equally? Who wants to go first?
You know, in my personal experience, when I was talking to Mr. An and also having a conversation, one of the things that I remembered was when I was in college in the US, I remember seeing my male students coming out to the lawn and talking about gender equality.
Wow.
And at the time, I did not appreciate it as much. But what I came to understand is equality always starts with cooperation.
Right.
It is not about which is better or which is worse.
Definitely.
So I really do hope that both men and women do come together to create a society, because let's face it, like happy wife, happy life, happy husband, happy house.
Right. So mutual cooperation
Yes.
is always important. Anything you'd like to add, Walter?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I feel like our generation is making this move forward, and as we get older, hopefully the younger generation as well latches onto what we're trying to do. But I know there's a lot of pushback these days, but we got to keep moving forward.
Right. So I hope we can see a society where everyone is treated equally as others.
Exactly.
And until then, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainho.
This is always fun. Thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you everyone for watching. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. We are New Generation.